Ever since the horrible news came out about Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Goncalves, and Madison Mogan, the whole case has been shrouded in a lot of mystery. All we know at this point really is what was in the probable cause affidavit and a few facts that have trickled out here and there. But all of that leaves me scratching my head about the case. Here are 10 reasons I scratch my head about this case.
In this episode, we'll be discussing 10 things about the Kohberger case that just leave us questioning and confused. I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
And we have Doug Cope here today. How are you doing today, Doug?
Good, very good. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So today we're going to be going over some of a little bit of the more stranger topics about the Kohberger case that aren't necessarily, foolproof, as some people would think in a situation like this where we have DNA evidence.
I put together a list of 10 things that just, when you look at the probable cause affidavit and the few facts that have come out, it's just a little bit off. So, Doug, you want to kick us off here?
Yes, these are these 10 things. These are really good. And by the way, for those people who are watching this, these YouTube videos are produced by Attorney Myers. They are some of the best on YouTube that are available. And a lot of thought goes into producing these, and a lot of effort. Let's go to number. In other words, don't watch all the other crap. This stuff is good.
Remember this, commenters.
Number 10, an 8-hour delay between homicides at 4 to 4:25 a.m. and the 911 call. That has been a question from the start. Now, as I recall from the, I don't know about the evidence, but some of the theories in this case was one of the other residents in that home didn't report it.
It was Dylan Mortensen that looked out of her bedroom door three times, and she thought she heard a scuffle, which she thought was Xana Kernodle and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin fighting. And so some people say it's alleged that, we don't know. This is all, allegations. Some people say that she thought it was Ethan Chapin going by the door.
Yes.
And so that explains why she went back to bed.
Exactly.
Other people,
she thought she didn't think anything of it at first, and it took several hours before it was determined, something very serious must have gone on here.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, that the probable cause affidavit itself said that she went into a shock phase, which she had a shock freeze phase. And I just don't buy it because no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible.
No.
It's possible. It's not plausible, but it's possible. I mean, you never know how people can react to different things or circumstances that they may see or hear or feel. So, is it possible? Sure. Yeah, it's possible. Is it likely? Probably not.
Also, the implication is that they weren't asleep for 8 hours either. It's like, if I go to sleep at 4 a.m., I'm waking up at past noon, regardless. It's weird to, who's waking up 4 hours, 5 hours, afterwards too.
Well, these are college students.
I don't know, and we really don't have any evidence, but I find it totally improbable for a couple of reasons. One is there have been cases of 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds seeing a crime and they call 911 immediately right away. So that's the first reason I don't buy it. The second reason I don't buy it is that when law enforcement showed up at 1122 King Road, there were several people standing outside. They called other people before they called 911. There were rumors on YouTube, that there were people at 9 o'clock in the morning in that town that knew what had happened, that knew that something bad had happened there. And again, we don't know. It's all people saying it here and there, but no, I don't buy it at all that they waited for. I don't
Well,
know.
these days, when like an incident happens on the street, a lot of people will gather around with their cell phones and just take pictures of the cell phones and never even call police to say, hey, maybe you should come here and try to alleviate this situation, or hey, call EMS because somebody's hurt here. So,
Mhm.
What were they taking pictures of? I have a question for you. Of what were they
yes.
taking pictures?
Well, yeah, that's true.
And it's also like, though, how would they even have known in the first place, though? Because it's like when something goes on inside a house, it's just like you can't really tell what's happening inside the house
Well,
from
I gotta
outdoors.
I gotta say something that I experienced years ago as a reporter. There was, and this case just came up, well, yesterday. 10 years ago, there was a teacher in what town was Danvers on the North Shore who was killed by one of her students. Her body put in a trash basket and dumped in the
I
back
remember
of the
that.
school. That was Ritzer was her name. Geez, I don't remember her first name now, but I was covering that story as a reporter at the time and went up to Danvers at the time. And there was no official information coming out of the police department or the DA's office or anything. But when I got outside the school at it was like 7:30 in the morning, and I guess school had been canceled for the day, but students were all showing up outside the school. I heard the complete story from the students
Mhm.
right then, right from the
Yep.
start,
Mhm.
right then.
Yep.
So all the students knew exactly what happened inside that school without any official information being released
Mhm.
by anybody. So I guess the point is somehow stuff gets out, and especially now with social media being what it is, all those kids knew exactly what happened before I did. So
Mhm.
Well, I'm glad you told that story because there are those who say that, for example, there was a fellow that had to get up and go to work at 9 o'clock on that day. And when he got up, some phone calls and texts were made, and he knew that something horrible had happened inside 1122 King Road. And so those stories are out there. There are some people who say, oh, that's been debunked, but has it really been debunked? Or is it something that they just don't want to talk about? But I think what you just told us about what happened in Danvers, Massachusetts, which for you
mhm,
non-Massachusetts people, that's just north of Boston. Um,
yes.
that's the kind of thing that people are saying happened. Why it happened? Well, we can talk about that maybe a little bit further. Let's go into reason number 9. Jack Showalter, Hoodie Guy at the food truck, was following Kaylee and Maddy, and they took his picture and ignored him. He drove out of town in the middle of the night after the murders. And again, there are people that say this has been debunked. But
Mhm.
has it? And there are those who have said that this has been cleared, but has it? Because there are some interesting kind of facts. Jack Showalter is known as the Hoodie Guy at the grub truck. There's a video out there where you can see him. He had clearly followed the girls from the bar. He was not talking to them, they were not with him. Jack told someone else that he was watching them, and
Hmm.
they found a way to ditch him before leaving the grub truck. The plot thickens, though. Jack Showalter was known to have a very severe anger and rage problem that caused issues in the same fraternity as Ethan Chapin. The final straw was when Jack Showalter was kicked out of that fraternity because he was caught putting dead carcasses of animals on the lawn of a different fraternity. Jack was then kicked out of that fraternity that Ethan was a member of. Allegedly, Kaylee Goncalves' father, Steve, who we know did his own sort of investigation, said only that he felt that certain people were cleared too quickly. And most people think this is one of the people. Mr. Showalter, Hoodie Guy, right after that night, in fact, in the middle of the night, took a 5-hour drive to his parents' hunting cabin. It's very suspicious that you drive a 5-hour drive in the middle of the night, after 1:30 in the morning. The
So
theory
Mhm.
is
yeah,
that he took the theory is that he took the knife and maybe a souvenir and took them up there and buried them. So the final thing is that his father then apparently, according to reports, took him to South Africa, where he could not be questioned or asked to give DNA. Now, all of that has been debunked, but has it?
And the motive for him is because Kaylee and Maddy ignored him. Is that it? And
well,
this guy was
not only that,
yeah.
not only that, he and Ethan had words. Apparently, they didn't get along, and Ethan was, BMOC in the fraternity, and he had been kicked out. So there was bad blood. So was it bad blood, or he didn't like the fact the girls gave him the cold shoulder? We don't know.
The carcasses is also like really damning right there too, because it's just like how are you getting these animal carcasses, and what is so deranged about you that you're like putting them out there, And
well,
he was also
Idaho,
following them.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have animal carcasses?
Nobody. Okay, Lainey, it's your turn with number 8.
So with number 8, we're discussing some latent footprint outside of Dylan's door. So they didn't find this until the second processing of the scene. So it's a little suspicious that it seems that this footprint had been cleaned up. So why didn't they find the footprint the first time? Had something been going on that they were trying to get rid of this footprint,
Well, we go back to number 10. Why was there an 8-hour delay between when Dylan saw the person with the bushy eyebrows and then they called police? 8 hours later, did they clean the place up? Why did they clean the place up? What did they clean up? So this is an unanswered question, really.
Well, yeah, it is. And I believe you've mentioned also the cleanup was not done properly. Was not done as it should have been.
Well, they cleaned the. Are you talking about the kids or the law enforcement?
Law enforcement, I guess. Yeah.
Law enforcement went through and cleaned the place once, and then they went back and cleaned it a second time, and we'll have to wait for trial for that explanation. And then at some point, even after that, after the initial, cleaning everything out, they took out all the furniture, they took out all the evidence and locked the place up. Even after that, 3 or 4 figures from law enforcement who were in plain clothes went back into the place. And a couple of reporters were standing outside and said, "Can you tell us what's up?" They wouldn't tell anyone. So, there's something that we just don't know about. It's just something to scratch your head about, Doug.
That is the curious thing that you bring up. Yeah, that I think is perhaps significant. But
just like, okay,
so many questions. So many questions.
Doug, it's your turn with number 7.
Number 7, the ferocity of the attack. Kaylee was stabbed, apparently, 54 times. Now, to my knowledge, they were not shooting a Halloween movie there, or was Alfred Hitchcock in the vicinity. So that is definitely a questionable thing. I mean, obviously, she was dead after much fewer than 54 stabbings. So, I mean, this would perhaps indicate somebody who was just a little off, don't you think?
Yeah,
So,
I can't.
Well,
that is question.
Well, they must have had a lot of rage, because I don't know if you remember seeing the shots right after this happened back in November 13th of 2022. They actually had a shot of blood dripping out of the building along the concrete foundation.
Oh my
Now,
God.
That's a little much.
That's a little much. Okay, so now
I can't do anything 54 times.
Well, 54 stabbings, you have to wonder about the mental state of the alleged stabber.
No evidence of a forced entry. And we discussed this in a previous video where they had like little keypads. So you had to know the combination in order to get in. And a lot of people I saw in the comments before were touching on the fact that it was a party house. So a lot of people knew the key code, but I don't know as much of Kohberger, because they knew Kohberger, I might be mistaken, but he was working at like a restaurant, versus this other person had been in the same fraternity as Ethan, which is interesting. So I don't know one way or the other, but they had been able to get into the house. And I mean, you never know, but like realistically, if you ask someone for like the code to someone else's house, like they're not gonna really give it to you. So you would have had to know it firsthand. So they would have kind of had to have had some connection with whoever got into the house, I imagine.
Well, I
Well,
guess, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that a lot of people did know the code to the keypad. In fact, it being, and and I hate, always bringing this up that it's a college house. The numbers might have been written right underneath the keypad for all we know.
Mm.
Hey, you need to come in. Here are the numbers. You
what's
know,
the point of that?
well, nobody ever figures something like this is going to happen in their home. I mean, you never think of that. So,
Yeah.
no evidence of a forced entry. Okay, I don't think that's unusual.
Mhm.
Well, question. And this is for the conspiracy theorists that think that Hoodie Guy did it, because Hoodie Guy apparently,
Oh
had been
yes.
in and out of the house. He knew the house. He, was one of the partiers that went to the parties and drank beer and had a good time. So he was familiar with the house. He would have been able to get in. Whereas Bryan Kohberger, as far as we know, and again, we don't have the evidence, but as far as we know, he had not been in the house before. So is this a key that says there's reasonable doubt that maybe Bryan Kohberger is not the man, and maybe somebody else who was one of the regular partiers is the guy? That's a question.
Mhm.
That's not a statement. I mean, I
Well,
don't
I
know.
mean, I sure. I mean, it's a possibility, and if you're considering all possibilities in this case, I guess you'd have to consider that one as well. But the fact that there was no evidence of a forced entry in a house that's frequented by a lot of people all the time, again, I don't think that's that unusual. So,
Yeah, it's a
And
little like we discussed, it's just that like this person's putting dead carcasses on of animals onto lawns, and then we
yeah.
have Kohlberger who's supposed to be like this genius and know all of this stuff, and like there's so much evidence like him leaving his phone on and stuff where it's like a little interesting, a little interesting.
hmm,
I'll only say this from the civil attorney's point of view. If you report to an insurance company that somebody stole your car and there was no sign of a forced entry, or if you report to an insurance company that somebody, got into your house and stole all your expensive collection of Eric Clapton guitars and your widescreen TVs and everything else, but there was no sign of a forced entry, you're going to have, I'm just telling you, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do to that insurance
Mhm.
company as to why there was no forced entry. They're going to question that. So uh, that's an analogy to the civil world and the insurance world where they question everything. I can
sure.
only assume that law enforcement asked a lot of questions as to how this could happen, and there be no evidence of a forced entry. It's another head scratcher. That's what it is.
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously not the same police department and there was no murders involved, but years ago, probably, close to 6 or 7 years ago, my apartment got broken into. And the cops put in 0 effort to find the forced entry, and it wasn't until weeks after that we discovered that one of our windows broken. So obviously there's no dead bodies, but at the same time, you also there's so much stuff. I mean, they've scrubbed through this house a million times, but you know.
Number 5 is mine. If law enforcement knew about the Elantra and if Coburg was a person of interest early on, why did they follow him all the way to Pennsylvania and only then go through the trash? Couldn't they have gone through the trash at his home or his work or his school in Washington State? I guess the point of
Yeah,
this is they did all those things that are in the probable cause affidavit. They had it nailed down to a white Elantra, and they had the Elantra going around the house 12 times and then once the day after. And so they had some DNA on the knife sheath, but they didn't know what to do with that. Couldn't they have gone through the trash at his school or at his work or at his apartment? Why did they have to tail him all the way to Pennsylvania? I don't get that.
that is a little strange. That's very strange. Well, obviously they tailed them all the way to Pennsylvania because they didn't think they had enough evidence
Mhm.
to press
Right.
against him at the time, and it was a fishing expedition.
We go down to 4, and this one's yours, Doug.
Yes, if Bryan Kohberger really learned how to commit the perfect crime, studying under Dr. Ramsland, who knew BTK from writing a book about him, getting a master's degree in criminology, and now studying in a PhD program for criminal justice. Why did he make so many mistakes? Taking his phone as he drove by the house 12 times when everyone knows cell phones track us, leaving the knife sheath behind, using his own car and not a substitute getaway car. Now, all three of those things we've talked about previously on this fine program, but
Why, thank you.
it, it, it is odd that he would take his own phone because, yeah, it's common now that your phone gets pinged, as they call it, to determine your location. And the knife sheath thing, I've never really understood either. Why that was left behind in that
It was the
DNA.
snap on the knife sheath. It
Snap.
was the
Okay.
snap at the very top had touch DNA, which means he just touched it. And then they
Yeah.
matched that up to his father's DNA in
father.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And the fact that he did
But
use
then,
his own car, that could be easily
yeah.
traced to him, that is also rather bizarre. So, it's all these other unanswered questions that again make you scratch your head.
Yeah.
Well, anybody that even watches the movies knows that, a 1930s bank robber movie, they use they use another
Yeah,
car. And I'm
even
not saying
even
he should have
Bonnie and
stolen a car,
Clyde.
but yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Use another car, and then you drive it to a garage, and you switch into a different car, and then you keep going, and then that way the coppers won't find you. That's 1930s movies. I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And we had discussed a little bit outside of the podcast. Why you can go on Craigslist and, get a beater car for $1,000-$2,000 cash. It's not
yeah.
completely unreasonable to be able to get the car. And also with the driving by the house 12 times, it may seem, a little suspicious and damning. But
Mm,
at the same time, it's kind of hard to empathize with this in a post-COVID, post-gas prices world. But I remember when I was younger, it's just people would just drive around for fun, and you would drive around the same area and do that for hours. So even though I'm not going to be spending my gas money doing that, you would think that, like you said, it's just if he's been studying this for so long and is supposed to be a genius, why
mm.
wouldn't you just leave your phone at home if you were going to
Laney Lowe,
scope out an area?
I suggest that you take up Idaho residency, because I would think that a fence would want you on the jury for Mr. Kohlberger's alibi is that he was driving around.
Everybody likes to drive
Just listening
around.
to some tunes. He's
You
singing
just-
in the
you
car,
just-
having a jolly good time.
Well, I believe it, Attorney Myers and I would remember when you could buy $1 worth of gasoline and drive around all night.
Oh my god, no
Oh, yeah.
universe for me. Not in
Yeah.
my
Oh, yeah.
lifetime.
Oh, yeah. But to be serious,
I
just for 1 second,
Yes.
it makes no sense that this guy, was studying criminal justice and criminology, and that he would make all these stupid mistakes. I mean, it's just somebody that, it's been suggested by
Unwise.
others, not me, but he had studied BTK, the serial murderer in Ohio, and he had studied Ted Bundy, the serial murderer that started out in Washington State and ended up down in Florida. He had studied all of these people, and if he had studied all of these people, he certainly, I'm glad he didn't learn anything, but he made just
Well,
way too many mistakes.
perhaps he wanted to be found. Perhaps.
Why?
he didn't want to
police.
pay his student loans.
Yes. Perhaps
Literally.
he was
Why would
giving,
you want?
perhaps this was all part of his criminology background in testing the police to see if he left all these clues for them, would they be able to find him and charge him?
Mhm. It's
Well,
really
I was
weird.
listening.
Yeah.
I was
Like
listening to one of the programs about him, and they spoke to some of the other students that he studied with in college in Pennsylvania. And in one of the classes, they actually had a crime lab where it was a building. It was a fake building that was set up where they would go in and they would actually study crime scenes. And they were
Mhm.
given a crime, and they were told that they wanted to to study it until they could figure it out and solve it. So this is a person that has studied crime scenes, at least academically, in school, so that if he got out and if he had gone in a different path, he could have become a really good detective. But so this is someone that has actually studied crime scene investigation and forensics. And so for someone to study this stuff and then get out and, it's unbelievable to me. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
now
mean,
we
even
go to
on the podcast, I was gonna say, like, how many cases have we discussed where it's like their car got pinged, their phone got pinged? This is a very common thing. Like we've talked about multiple cases just here alone. So if we're aware of this stuff, you would think that he would be too.
Well, again,
Well, yeah,
maybe
'cause
he wanted to be found.
He's playing his little game. He's like, here you go,
Yes,
investigators.
maybe.
I
Maybe
don't want my
this
student loans.
this was all a game for him, all a big game of putting pieces together.
Well, I'm
Hmm.
glad if that's true. If that's true, I'm glad they got him. So
Yeah.
number three is mine, and this is an interesting little factoid. And again, we don't know what's in the real files, and we won't know until there's actually a trial. But from what we know, law enforcement never found the weapon. At least
Right.
it is not mentioned in the probable cause affidavit. And wouldn't you think that if they did find the weapon, that they would have put that in the probable cause affidavit? And not only that, the manufacturer does not have Mr. Kohberger in their system. Now, the moment is that they sent out warrants to Amazon.com and all
Amazon,
these
yeah.
other places.
Mhm.
So, but as far as we know, they do not have the knife. They do not have the murder weapon. And not that you absolutely positively have to have it, but that's something that kind of ties the whole case up with a bow to the jury, wouldn't you think?
Hmm.
Yes, you would think that. Now, I mean, he could have bought that anywhere. I mean, sure, they sent inquiries to Amazon and a number of other mail order or internet companies, but I mean, he could have bought that from some antique shop. He could have bought it from someplace that would have no record of selling something like that, or he could have bought it from some guy who had a knife. I don't know. So,
Buying it like secondhand is, I think, one of the few justifiable like reasons as to why his DNA would have been on
yeah.
that sheath, because he would have needed to touch it initially and not be wearing sketchy gloves, presumably. But it is interesting to me that you would think that they would have, well, like you said, he could have bought it at an antique shop, but presumably they would have seized his computer and done forensics on the computer history and things along that nature. Not saying you can't just buy a burner phone or do it on a computer at like a cafe or something, but still
Well, I
pretty
tell you, I have
interesting.
bought things at antique shops that there are no records of me buying things. You know,
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
cash transaction, no sales tax, no nothing.
The Craigslist
So
car.
And Doug, you
here's
want to
the
tell us,
tax.
Mr. Cope, you want to enlighten us as to what things you've bought with paper trail?
Buy any knives recently?
No, but I got to tell you, in people that I do deal with in various aspects, no, yeah, there's no record keeping involved, and it's not in buying illegal materials either.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I know
No,
what you mean.
no,
No, I know
it's
what you
just
mean. You go to especially maybe not in Massachusetts, because legally you are supposed to charge the sales tax. But
yes,
yeah, you go into some of these little back places in
exactly.
other states. We won't mention them, but they don't have sales tax. And yeah, you're right. I mean, something they have something listed for $15. You tell them, I'll give you a $10 bill. They're like,
Exactly.
great, here, get out of here. You give them the
I do
10.
that. I do that all the time,
Flea
and
market,
there's
swap meet.
never.
Sure.
I mean, some places, yes, do write out a receipt, and but a lot of places don't. So I'm not saying that it's common, but or that it applies in this case, but it could.
Garage
So
sale.
yeah, exactly, garage sale.
Garage
So
sale.
you know,
Who has a K-bar military style K-bar knife just hanging around in their
well,
garage?
again, we're talking Idaho, right?
I guess
So
With the
so.
animal carcasses.
yeah, animal carcasses, yeah.
Okay, number 2, Lainey, this is yours.
How can there be DNA on the knife sheet snap, but none at all on any of the victims after a bloody, violent slaughter. And I kind of touched on this a little bit where had he bought the knife secondhand, that is a little bit more justifiable that there would be a little bit of DNA on that. But still, it was this man who's supposed to be like an expert in the situation not only is like leaving the sheath, but also leaving DNA on the sheath, isn't aware that he's leaving the sheath or can't find it for whatever reason. But there's enough DNA on the sheath, but nowhere else. It's a little interesting.
I know what people are going to say. I know what the critics are going to say, and sure, go down in the comments and tell us.
Yeah,
But
let us. Yeah.
what they're going to say is, well, we don't know. Maybe there was DNA all over the place, but you know, I mean, because the police still have all the information, and they're going to reveal it all at trial because they're keeping the cards close to the vest. I say no. If there was DNA all over the place, wouldn't they have put that in the probable cause affidavit? Would have made more sense
Sure.
to me. I don't know.
Number one, ooh, look at that nice brown paper bag. Is it a coincidence that Xana's 4 o'clock DoorDash delivery and a 4 o'clock start time for the crime? So did a DoorDash delivery person, did they commit the crime? Did they see the crime? What's the connection between the DoorDash delivery at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is even for a college campus, that is kind of unusual, and a 4 o'clock start time allegedly for the crimes occurring. So that again is a head scratcher.
You know what? There's no evidence. Of course, we're not saying that any of what we've said is fact or any of what we've said is evidence. There's no evidence connecting the DoorDash guy, and I only assume that the police, question the guy. But isn't that an odd coincidence that Xana Kernodle got her DoorDash delivery from Jack in the Box at 4 o'clock, and 4 o'clock is precisely the time, according to the probable cause affidavit, that these horrible crimes took place? Isn't that a horrible coincidence, at least?
Well, you would think, yes, and then as you said, you would think that law enforcement would have interviewed that person extensively. So if they have, and we don't have any other arrests in this case, you've got to think that they didn't know about it, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, or had no involvement. So it's another head scratcher.
Yeah, in the DoorDash driver's defense, at least that's something relatively easy to clear in the sense where like maybe they had another place to go. But at the same time, there's no signs of forced entry. Who's to say that the door wasn't like left open even after the DoorDash pickup? So theoretically, the DoorDash driver could have a strong alibi if he was proven to have dropped off his food at the other locations. But at the same time, that also leaves more room for maybe the door didn't even have to be locked in the first place.
Maybe the hoodie guy was working for DoorDash.
It's honestly, I don't trust this hoodie guy. I don't trust anybody who's leaving animals.
It's just this whole case has so many unknowns and so many questions and so many coincidences. And I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyhow. I don't think law enforcement is doing anybody any favors by playing the cards so close to their chest, because, by saying there's going to be a gag order, and by saying we're not going to disclose anything, and by saying it's all a big secret, aren't they just encouraging everyone in the entire world to talk about it? And, thank you, Doug, for saying what you said in the beginning, that we do some research, but, we all have full-time jobs doing other things. So I have a little bit of time to do some research, but people that are out there, and I'm not going to mention anyone, TMZ, people are out there and they just make stuff up and they just talk. They have an hour to fill, and I think at least some people are just making stuff up to talk about, and they go on and on and on and on and on without even any documentation or research or anything. And I think, again, I may regret saying this, but I don't think that law enforcement is doing itself any favor by just, keeping stuff so close to their chest, and I know, Doug, you might disagree with me, but by this gag order, I don't think that's really helping anyone.
Well,
end of rant.
Yeah, end of rant. Well, as you know, prosecutors don't like to reveal too much information about what they've gathered before it actually does go to trial. And they don't want to prejudice a potential jury as well. So, Yeah, it's not the best situation, but of course, it's a very grisly murder. I mean, 4 people were stabbed horribly, young people, and sure, it's going to generate a lot of interest throughout the country, and maybe that does justify a gag order, and maybe it doesn't. But I just wish that a trial date would be set in this case, so we could actually start to see something definitive happening.
It is interesting to see what's going to be revealed and come up, and just to see how it all plays out. I mean, I think just by the looks of it, it's pretty damning for Kohberger, and we'll all be shocked and surprised if anything else doesn't come out. But that doesn't mean that there's not room for, like we mentioned, these little holes that weren't exactly filled. And yeah.
And for those who may be
Yeah.
looking for these videos on YouTube or the World Wide Web, where else, I ask you, where else would you get a top 10 list like the one presented today? You won't. You
Exactly.
won't find that anywhere else. You got to keep coming right here.
The
There.
top 10 questionable clues.
Yeah. Where else are you going to find that? Nowhere. Nowhere.
Exactly.
I don't know. I really don't know. All right, Lainey, thank you very much. Doug, thank you very much. Any closing thoughts?
Thank you guys so much
All right,
for watching
thanks,
today's
Doug.
video.
Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with all your friends and enemies. Thank you.
And enemies, especially the enemies.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.